Now, ever wondered why some photographs look professional and some don't? In this day and age, we've all got a digital camera with an automatic exposure, autofocus. It's very difficult to not get a photograph right. Now, why does a photographer take better pictures and their photographs look better? Well, mainly it's because of depth of field. So in this lesson, you'll learn how to take photographs like a professional, and I'm sure you'll be amazed at the difference in the results. So look and learn. Well, what is depth of field? But depth of field, or DOF, D-O-F, as it's called by many, is the distance between the part of the subject that's in focus and the part of the subject that's out of focus. Now, in focus, out of focus, to my mind, is a very subjective subject. But I'm sure that if you'd like to know more about it, there'll be a nice complicated explanation on the web somewhere, probably under the theme, Circles of Confusion. It would certainly confuse me, so I'll use my eyes to decide. So the depth of field, as you see here, is somewhere on the plane of focus. Now this extends front, back, side to side and vertically of the camera. The plane of focus follows a line from the back of the camera through the lens and continues in a straight line, which means that when a camera is at an angle, the plane of focus will be as well. You should only worry about that if you're shooting a subject from high up, as it could result in the top being in focus and the bottom not. There are ways of changing the plane of focus in relation to the camera, but that's a very advanced technique with special and expensive equipment, so I'll leave that for an advanced lesson. Now that's the end of the boring bit, so let's move on and look at some pictures. Notice the reduced depth of field, with the subject nice and sharp and the background either out or soft focus. They've all been shot with a wide open aperture on a good quality 200mm lens. You'll need to experiment a bit to find out how much of depth of field you have on a particular subject at different distances. Now that might sound like a lot of work, but I can assure you it's not. This of course is just one use of depth of field, so let's have a look at another. Well, here we have exactly the reverse situation where we want as much in focus as possible. So it's very simple, we just do the reverse. We close down the aperture enough until we've got the whole thing in focus as required. Now to another chart. This one explains how a change in aperture will affect shutter speed. I've started with an imagined exposure of 250th of a second at f8. Now as we open the aperture, that of course lets more light through the lens. So the shutter speed must be increased to allow less light through the shutter to compensate. As you can see, the shutter speed doubles for every stop the aperture opens. This has two effects. The first one is that it reduces the depth of field because the aperture has opened, and the other is because the shutter has got faster, that it makes it easier to stop a moving subject. Now, as we go in the opposite direction and we close the aperture, we then have to reduce the shutter speed to compensate. Now, this of course will give us a lot more depth of field, so a lot more will be in focus, but make it very difficult to stop a moving subject. So it's all a compromise. Okay, let's look at this shot. It's from a children's clothes catalogue I shot on location in the States. It's got very little depth of field. It makes the girl really jump out from the image because the rather complicated background is kept way out of focus. Here the depth of field is so short or shallow that her back shoulder is starting to go out of focus, or soft focus as this intermediate stage is called. Now an effect as exaggerated as this isn't possible with all lenses. A wide-angle lens would have little or no effect, whereas the longer the focal length of the lens, the greater the effect. Now this was shot on a 200mm lens, but a very good one that opened up to 1.8. But you should get the same effect, or a similar effect, with a 400mm lens that probably opens up to f4. Now here's another photograph that demonstrates the technique. Now as we zoom in, you'll see how sharp and short the depth of field is on the grass. Now this does present a problem of getting the focus in the right place at the right time. Now either you can wait for the subject to come towards the camera where you've pre-focused on a point, or use a camera that will follow the focus as the subject moves, but that's not always the case. Now there is another way, and that's to focus as the subject, manually focus as the subject moves towards you, but it's not quite as easy as it sounds. Now this is a little setup I've done in the studio to demonstrate. Now you may see the V on the word vertical is very slightly unsharp, and that's because of course the camera is pointing down a fraction, therefore the plane of focus is pointing down as well. Now we've shot this at 2.8 and you'll see that the 4 and 5 on the bottles are almost in focus. I'm focused in fact between them. Now as we drop or close the aperture, you'll see the numbers start to come into focus. Now you may notice that they're coming into focus faster at the rear than they are at the front, and that's because when we close the aperture we will increase the depth of field 2/3 towards the rear and 1/3 towards the front. That's just a fact of life. So you have to be careful where you focus in the beginning when you're calculating what you want in focus. Now what to do if you can't get the whole depth of field? Well, the only thing to do is to move further away, make the object smaller in the image, or change to a shorter focal length lens. That'll help as well. Well, that was interesting, wasn't it? So I guarantee you've learned something, and I guarantee your photographs will improve, and that makes it worthwhile. That's the important thing, and you can follow all the other lessons on this channel.